secretly gave my college fund to her new husband's kids and lied straight to my face. I still remember the exact moment I realized my entire college fund was gone. I was in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the acceptance letter from my dream school and feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. My heart was pounding as I flipped to the second page, where the tuition information was printed in bold. It was a lot of money, but for years my mom, Karen, had reassured me that we had it covered. She'd saved up every spare dollar, plus what was left from my late dad's life insurance. "You'll go wherever you want," she used to tell me, and I believed her completely. Then, that afternoon, I got a notification on my phone that a bank statement had arrived in the mail, so I rushed downstairs to see if it showed how close I was to my goal. When I opened the envelope, my eyes scanned a frighteningly small number. So small I thought there must be a mistake. My balance was almost zero. I couldn't move. My hands started shaking and my stomach twisted in knots. I checked the statement more carefully, flipping through the pages that listed withdrawal after withdrawal, each with a date that matched the past few months. At first, I thought maybe there had been fraud. That was the only thing that made sense. No one was allowed to touch that money except Mom and me. I felt this cold rush of panic flooding through my veins and I ran to find my mom. The house was quiet except for some muffled voices coming from the living room. My mom was in there with her new husband, Steve, and his teenage kids, Madison and Tyler. They'd moved in about half a year ago, and while I'd tried my best to welcome them into my life, something had always felt off. I walked in, clutching the statement with white-knuckled fingers. "Mom," I said, my voice wavering. "Can we talk for a second?" Everyone turned to look at me, and I noticed how Madison and Tyler immediately gave me this odd look, like I was intruding on a conversation I had no right to be part of. Steve just raised his eyebrows, looking more bored than concerned. My mom quickly pushed off the couch and met me in the doorway. "Sure, honey, what's up?" she asked. But there was a nervous undertone in her voice that I'd never heard before. I glanced at Steve and his kids, then gently pulled Mom into the hallway so we could speak in private. My heart was pounding so loud I could hardly hear my own words. "Mom," I whispered. "The college fund. Look at this." I thrust the bank statement toward her. Her face changed instantly from mild curiosity to outright panic. "Where did all that money go? It was almost everything Dad left me, plus what you said you'd been saving." It's empty." My words came out shaky and breathless. For a moment, she just stared at the document, not saying a word. Then she squeezed her eyes shut, like she was bracing for a bomb to go off. "Jen, I need to explain," she began, her voice dropping to a hushed tone. "It's not what you think. Things have been complicated. Steve had some unexpected expenses, and before she could finish, I felt my entire body go hot with anger and betrayal. Expenses?" I repeated, nearly choking on the word. "Mom, that money was supposed to be untouchable. You promised me." My voice wobbled in and out of control. I was so scared, so hurt, that my throat felt like it was clamping shut. She started rambling about how difficult it was to merge two families, how Madison needed an expensive tutor for her AP classes, and Tyler needed to switch schools, which apparently came with a private school tuition, uniforms, and a million other costs. There were also some credit card debts of Steve's she had to help pay off to avoid bigger financial disasters. I just listened, numb. One part of me refused to believe it was true. The other part was already accepting that my mother had used my education fund to help her new husband's kids. "What about me?" I asked, my voice quiet. "What about my future?" I was too stunned to cry, too heartbroken to even raise my voice further. She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Jen, I'm sorry," she said, and her eyes were filling with tears. "It all happened so fast. I thought we'd figure out a solution before you even noticed." "Noticed?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Mom, I'm going to college in a matter of months. How could you think I wouldn't notice? Why didn't you just talk to me?" She swallowed hard, and I could see the guilt etched across her face. "I didn't want you to worry." I kept telling myself it was temporary. Steve promised me he'd replace all the money once he got back on his feet. But things kept piling up. I wanted to collapse right there. I could hear footsteps and hushed voices from the living room, probably Steve and his kids eavesdropping. In that moment, I hated them for it. My mom, the one person who'd always had my back, who'd promised me I'd never have to stress about affording college, had taken everything for the benefit of these people who were basically strangers to me. Without another word, I stormed back upstairs to my room, slammed the door, and crumpled into a heap on my bed. My eyes burned and my breathing was ragged. I felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. For a while, I just lay there, trying to process what had happened. My phone buzzed with texts from friends asking about my acceptance letters, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I tried to replay what my mom had said about needing to take care of Steve's financial issues and his kids' academic needs. All I could think was, why them? Why not me? It sounded selfish in my head, but it was the truth. I was her daughter. I was the one whose father had died, leaving behind money specifically for my future. And now it was gone. That evening, I didn't come down for dinner. I heard them calling me, but I pretended to be asleep or immersed in homework. I felt tears burning my eyes off and on, but I didn't want them to see me like that. The next morning, as I was leaving for school, Mom tried to talk to me. "Jen, please," she said softly, stepping into the hallway just as I was grabbing my backpack. "Let me drive you. We can talk on the way." I shook my head. "I'll take the bus," I muttered, then pushed past her. When I got outside, I half ran down the block, not even waiting at the usual corner so she couldn't follow me. My mind was swirling with half-formed plans about scholarships, part-time jobs, loans, anything to salvage my dream of going to that university. I felt so lost and abandoned. At school, I opened up to my best friend Megan. We found an empty table in the library, and as quietly as I could, I told her everything. She looked outraged on my behalf. "That's insane," she whispered, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "Jen, you have to do something. You can't let them just steal your money." I shrugged, tears threatening to spill out again. "I don't even know what to do. Mom's name is on the account, so legally she can probably do anything she wants with it. And I'm only 17. Megan's face softened. "I'm so sorry. This is so messed up. Can you talk to a counselor or something?" I shook my head. The idea of discussing such a personal betrayal with a school counselor felt humiliating, and I doubted it would help me get the money back anyway. That night, I sat in my room, my textbooks open but unread. My eyes kept drifting to the acceptance letter pinned to my corkboard, the same board where I'd stuck pictures of me and Mom visiting campuses the previous year. We'd been so excited, talking about dorm life, new friendships, all those experiences I'd get to have in college. It felt like a different lifetime. I began searching online for scholarships and grants, anything I might qualify for at this late stage. I also checked out loan options, but my stomach sank seeing how high the interest rates were. I felt like I was suffocating. A few days later, Mom cornered me in the kitchen when I came down to get a snack. "Jen, I need you to listen," she said, her voice shaky. "I know you're furious and you have every right to be. I just want you to understand why I did this. Steve was in trouble. He was about to lose his house. He couldn't pay for Madison's therapy sessions or Tyler's tutoring. They've both had a rough time since their mother left." I stared at her. "What about me? I guess losing my dad wasn't rough enough?" I snapped back, feeling a fresh stab of anger that she would make me feel guilty for not caring about them. "They're not my responsibility." She seemed taken aback by my words, but also guilty. "I know, honey," she whispered. "But they're my responsibility now, too. We're a family." Those words enraged me. "No, we're not. They're just people who showed up in my life 6 months ago and apparently got everything I ever had saved for me. Don't call that family." I couldn't stand to look at her. She looked on the verge of tears again, but I was too hurt to comfort her. The resentment was boiling, and I felt like I might say something unforgivable if I stayed in the room. I rushed out the back door and took a walk around the neighborhood. It was freezing cold outside, but I didn't care. I needed air. The rest of that week was hell. Every time I came home from school, I saw some new purchase for Madison and Tyler. Shoes, clothes, the latest smartphone upgrades. It was beyond frustrating that they seemed completely unconcerned with the fact that my life had basically been turned upside down. One evening, I overheard them laughing in the living room about their upcoming summer plans. They were talking about a beach vacation, and apparently Mom and Steve had already booked a fancy resort. I felt like I'd stepped into an alternate universe. We didn't go on expensive vacations, not even once when Dad was alive. Yet here we were, hemorrhaging money so these kids and their father could keep up a lifestyle they apparently felt entitled to. I started spending more and more time at Megan's house, under the pretense of studying together. Truthfully, I just couldn't bear being in my own home, feeling that suffocating tension between Mom and me. Steve tried to act like everything was normal, but if I shot him a glare, he'd just shrug and avoid eye contact. I never once saw him apologize for what he'd done. Maybe in his mind, it was all justified because Mom agreed to it. I gathered up all the documentation I could find, every bank statement, every record of my dad's life insurance payouts, anything that might show the money was meant specifically for my education. But I kept hitting the same legal dead end. Mom was a co-owner on that account, and I was a minor. Meanwhile, the acceptance letter from my dream school felt like a ticking time bomb. If I didn't send in a deposit soon, I'd lose my spot. That deposit was supposed to come directly from my fund. Each day, the stress built. I tried to keep up appearances at school, but my grades started slipping. Teachers who'd always seen me as a top student began asking if something was wrong. I lied and said I was just tired. That senior year stress was getting to me. In truth, I wanted to scream from the rooftops that my own mother had sacrificed my future for a man she barely knew and his kids who treated me like I was in the way. One night, I quietly crept downstairs after everyone else had gone to bed. I needed answers. Real answers, not the half-truths Mom was feeding me. I opened Mom's laptop, which she often left on the kitchen counter, and typed in her password. I'd seen her type it a few times and I felt a wave of guilt for invading her privacy, but it was overshadowed by the rage and desperation in my chest. I navigated to the online bank statements and scrolled through months of transactions. My eyes widened as I saw the ridiculous sums spent on private school fees for Tyler, therapy bills for Madison, something labeled as home equity payoff for Steve's old house, plus a ton of retail charges for high-end gadgets and clothing I never even knew existed in our home. The total made my heart drop into my stomach. They'd burned through almost everything. A wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't just a temporary dip into the fund. This was complete devastation of something I'd trusted would always be there for me. I felt tears spill down my cheeks as I clicked through page after page. Furious and shaking, I emailed screenshots to myself as evidence, though I had no clue what I could even do with them. Then I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark kitchen, pressing my palms against my temples. The only light came from the glow of the screen, and it felt like the walls were closing in. Eventually, I found myself drafting an email to the financial aid office at my dream school, explaining the sudden change in my family's circumstances and asking if there was any possibility of an emergency scholarship or additional assistance. I poured my heart into that email, trying not to sound hysterical but also not hiding the urgency. I didn't mention the part where my own mother had essentially betrayed me. I wasn't sure how to phrase that in a formal request. I hit send, feeling like my only lifeline was now in the hands of a stranger in some university office. The next morning, Mom must have realized I'd been on her laptop because she confronted me as I was heading out the door. "Jen, did you look at my bank records last night?" She asked it quietly, a tremor in her voice. "Yeah," I responded, not bothering to deny it. I needed to know the truth. "You spent almost everything." She looked stricken and reached for my arm, but I shrugged away. "Honey, I'm sorry," she began, but I just shook my head. "Stop apologizing," I hissed. "If you were really sorry, you wouldn't have done it in the first place." Then I grabbed my backpack and left without another word. At school, I did my best to hold it together, but Megan noticed how pale and upset I looked. We sneaked out to the backfield during lunch and sat by the bleachers, where I finally let myself cry in full force. She hugged me and told me I wasn't alone, that we'd find a solution. "It's going to be okay somehow," she murmured, though we both knew it might not be. My phone buzzed with an email notification, and I nearly jumped out of my skin checking to see if it was from the financial aid office. It wasn't, just a reminder about an upcoming scholarship deadline. Megan helped me fill out the application that night at her house, referencing my test scores and extracurriculars, trying to piece together any shot at receiving money to offset what my mother and Steve had drained. I was already exhausted with the daily tension at home, but things got even worse when Steve's kids started making snide remarks. One afternoon, I came home from school and overheard Tyler on the phone with one of his friends. He was complaining loudly about how Mom's ex left a bunch of money that Dad's trying to fix up for the family. He didn't realize I was in the next room, hearing every word. My stomach turned at the way he described it, as though I was the leftover problem from a previous relationship, and Dad's money was some general fund they could all just tap into. When I confronted him, he just shrugged and said, "I'm sorry if you heard that, but it's not like I'm lying." So Madison was worse in a subtler way. She was older, closer to my age, and she'd make little comments about how stressful finances can be. Or she'd say it in this patronizing tone, as if we were discussing the weather. She seemed to enjoy watching me squirm. I wasn't sure what her endgame was. Maybe she wanted to establish dominance in the house, or maybe she just hated me for resenting them. Regardless, it made me resent them even more. Weeks passed, and I still hadn't heard back from the financial aid office. Every day, my mom tiptoed around me like I might explode at any moment. Steve acted like nothing was wrong, greeting me with a forced smile or a cheerful, "Hey, how's it going?" whenever I walked in the door. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he come up with a plan to repay what he owed, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. My mom kept telling me I'd find a way to pay for college through scholarships and loans, as if it were no big deal. She repeated the phrase, "You're smart, you'll figure something out," like it was an excuse for everything. One evening, I was in my room, feeling more hopeless than ever, when I heard a soft knock on the door. I didn't bother to answer, but Mom came in anyway, She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes. "Honey, can we talk?" she asked gently. I stayed silent. She sighed, then sat down on the edge of my bed. "I know you're upset, and you have every right to be. I just want you to know that I never intended for this to hurt you. I love you more than anything. Steve was in a bad situation. Oh, I was afraid we'd lose the house. I was afraid of going back to how lonely it was before I met him. I just thought, if we paid off his debts, we could build a stable home, and eventually we'd put the money back." I stared at her, my emotions swirling between anger, pity, and heartbreak. "Mom, you keep saying that, but you never once asked if I was okay with it. You never gave me a choice. You just took it." She started crying, which in the past would have made me rush to hug her. Now, it just made me feel numb and trapped. "I know," she whispered, wiping her cheeks. "I wish I could take it back." I wanted to scream that she could demand Steve and his kids stop spending money on luxurious things. But I knew that door had probably closed months ago. Instead, I said, "I'm going to find a way to pay for college, with or without your help." It came out cold and distant. She sobbed harder, murmuring something about being sorry again. But I'd heard it all before. A couple more weeks slid by in a blur of tension. Then, one Saturday morning, a letter arrived from my dream school's financial aid office. My hands shook as I opened it, reading the lines about how they admired my academic achievements but had limited funds to offer. They included a small grant, but it was nowhere near enough to cover all the costs. I'd still have to take out a significant loan or find other scholarships. My heart sank. I rushed to my room and slammed the door, tears spilling down my cheeks. I could maybe manage to pull together a patchwork of loans and smaller scholarships, but that meant years and years of debt. I felt so cheated. Dad had died before I was old enough to remember him, and he'd left that money for my future. It was supposed to make my life easier, not bury me under a mountain of loans. That afternoon, I decided I couldn't keep living in that house. I was nearly 18, and in a few months I'd graduate and hopefully go to college somewhere, even if it wasn't my first choice. My friend Megan had a cousin who owned a small apartment in town, and she suggested maybe I could rent a room there cheaply. It sounded extreme, but I was desperate for some distance from Mom, Steve, and their kids. I sat my mom down in the living room and told her my plan. Her face fell instantly. "You're leaving?" she asked, voice trembling. "You're not even 18 yet." I just nodded. "I can't stay here. Every day is torture, being reminded of what happened. I need space to figure out how to pay for college without losing my mind." She looked like I'd just run a knife through her. "Please don't go," she begged, glancing at Steve, who had walked into the room behind me. He said nothing, just looked at the floor. "Mom, I can't do this," I repeated, feeling tears burning at the back of my eyes. "You made your choice. I have to make mine." She tried to talk me out of it, but there was no turning back in my mind. The next day, I packed up a couple of suitcases and left. Megan's cousin graciously let me crash in a tiny bedroom in her apartment. I had to get a part-time job at a local diner to help with the rent, but at least I wasn't drowning in constant rage and sadness every time I saw Madison flaunting her brand new sneakers. Mom called me almost daily, leaving messages saying she missed me. Occasionally, I'd pick up and keep the conversation short. She'd ask about my plans if I needed any money, and I'd bite my tongue to stop from yelling that the only money that mattered was already gone. Despite the huge strain, I managed to graduate with decent grades. My acceptance at the dream school stood, but the financial barriers were still daunting. I ended up receiving a couple more smaller scholarships at the last minute, plus a Stafford loan, which made going there just barely possible. I'd need a part-time campus job, and I'd still graduate with debt, but at least I could go. The night before I left for orientation, Mom showed up at Megan's cousin's apartment. She was standing outside in the drizzle, looking lost and miserable, holding a small envelope. "Jen," she said softly when I opened the door, "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I found a way to scrape together a little bit of money for you. It's not much, but maybe it'll help with books or something." I stared at the envelope, feeling a mix of anger and gratitude. I realized she must have borrowed it or saved up from her paycheck behind Steve's back. I accepted it and asked her if she was okay. She shook her head, tears welling up. "Steve lost more money and we're behind on some bills. It's been a nightmare, Jen. I'm so sorry you got caught in the middle. I never meant for this to happen." I believe she was sincere, but it didn't erase the betrayal. Still, she was my mom, and I felt a flicker of sympathy. "I have to get some sleep," I said quietly, not wanting to fight. She nodded, swallowing hard, and walked away. The next day, I left town for orientation. I felt lighter, even though a huge burden of debt loomed over me. At least I was heading toward the future I'd always dreamed of, in some form. The hardest part was knowing it would never be the same between me and my mom. She texted me periodically, but our conversations were stilted. I think a part of me was still too angry to let her fully back into my life. Another part of me was terrified she was trapped in a toxic marriage with Steve, who showed no signs of changing. During my first semester, I worked two part-time jobs, one at the campus bookstore and another at a coffee shop a few blocks away. It was exhausting, but it kept me afloat. The resentment sometimes flared up late at night when I'd see my classmates going out and having fun, while I counted pennies to afford textbooks. Still, I pushed forward. I made a few friends who understood my situation, and slowly I carved out a life for myself. Over time, Mom and I started talking more. She visited once, alone, no Steve, no step-siblings, and we had a long conversation in my dorm's common room. She apologized again, tears streaming down her cheeks as she admitted that Steve had essentially manipulated her, playing on her fear of being alone and making promises he never kept. She confessed she wished she'd never touched my fund, but she felt trapped and desperate. I wanted to say something cutting, but the sight of her so broken pulled at my heart. I ended up hugging her, and we both cried. Still, we couldn't pretend things were fixed. The wound was too deep. By the time I finished my freshman year, I'd come to terms with the fact that I'd be thousands of dollars in debt by graduation. It wasn't fair, but it was my new reality. Slowly, though, I realized I was stronger than I thought. I'd become resourceful, working multiple jobs, applying for every scholarship and internship I could find, leaning on friends for emotional support. I discovered that I could survive on my own, even though I wished I didn't have to. A few months later, word reached me that Steve's financial situation had gotten worse. He'd borrowed more money, and Mom was scrambling to make ends meet. It made me sick to think how different things could have been if she'd never touched my fund. Part of me wanted to swoop in and save her, but I knew I couldn't. She'd made her bed, and I had to focus on building my life so I wouldn't repeat her mistakes. We stayed in cautious contact. She seemed almost embarrassed to talk to me sometimes, like she knew I was sacrificing so much because of her decisions. By the time I was a junior in college, I felt a surge of pride that I'd gotten this far, juggling classes and jobs. Every time a payment deadline rolled around, I remembered the old bank statement with that zero balance, and I'd feel a spike of anger. But I'd also feel a determination not to let it define me. I had a few good friends who knew the whole story, and they helped me stay sane when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. Looking back, I realize how that moment, the day I opened the envelope and saw my college fund was gone, changed me forever. It shattered my innocence, the belief that I could implicitly trust the people closest to me. It forced me to become independent before I was really ready, but it also lit a fire in me. I worked harder, dug deeper, and proved to myself that I could make it even without the safety net that was supposed to be there all along. My mom and I are still rebuilding our relationship. I can't say I've forgiven her completely, but I understand she felt desperate and alone. She's not a bad person, just a flawed one, and I've come to realize most people are. Steve and I remain distant. I've never really spoken to him except for a few awkward words at holiday gatherings. Madison and Tyler eventually moved away for college or jobs, paid in part, I assume, by what used to be my fund, and I've never tried to stay in touch. It hurts to think about, so I don't dwell on it. Now I'm finishing up college, about to graduate with a degree I fought like hell to afford. I might be saddled with loans for a decade, but at least I can say I made it. And no matter how angry I once was, I also learned something important. Your future might not be as secure as you think, and sometimes you have to fight for it all on your own. It's been a brutal lesson, and there are still days I feel bitter and resentful, but I remind myself that I survived, that I'm stronger and more resilient than I ever imagined. If anyone reading this has gone through a similar betrayal, I hope you know you're not alone. It's possible to rebuild, even though it's not fair and it's definitely not easy. As for my mom, we're at least on speaking terms again. I talk to her every so often and visit on holidays, though I still get a pit in my stomach when I think back to that day. I do love her, and maybe in time our relationship will fully heal. For now, I'm focusing on what lies ahead, determined to make something of myself despite all that I lost. And in a strange way, that determination might be the one good thing that came out of this mess.